Hello and welcome to the Holyrood Sources podcast, where we take you inside Scottish politics. I'm Calum Macdonald. Welcome, thank you for finding us. And Andy Maciver's here. He was Director of Communications for the Scottish Conservatives. Hello, Andy.
Good morning.
Great to have you here. Geoff is off this week. He'll be back next week. Fear not. Great to have Andy with us. Coming up then on the podcast today, we're really considering Scotland's place in the world. And in light of all that is going on with Ukraine and Donald Trump and Sir Keir Starmer and progress, or otherwise, towards peace, what should Scotland, what can Scotland be doing and offering by way of a public response, a political response, and what do we need to consider by way of our defence policy as well? Later on in the podcast, Stuart Macdonald, who was MP for Glasgow South and SNP spokesperson for defence from 2017 to 2022 will join us, so stay with us for that. Lots to come ahead of that as well, though. You can watch all of this on YouTube. Just search for Holyrood Sources. You get clips, you get full episodes there as well. Just search for Holyrood Sources. You can follow us on X and Instagram. You can watch clips on TikTok and subscribe to the mailing list at holyroodsources.com. And we love it when you get in touch. In our last episode last week, we discussed, among other things, whether Fergus Ewing, the SNP MSP, is a rebel, an asset, or in fact both. This is in light of reports that the SNP may not back him to be their party's candidate for 2026. We had this message I just thought I'd read from Fraser. He says, I live in his constituency. He's a good MSP who is responsive and works hard. That he's rebellious on behalf of us, his constituents, is a good thing. I happen to disagree with Fergus on quite a number of things, but he is effective and speaks out for us. I would much rather have him as the SNP candidate than someone who is more totally compliant with things like the A9, the A96, HPMAs, etc., which I thought was an interesting one from Fraser. If you would like to WhatsApp us, you can do so. The number is 0333 404 6507. Right, let's get to it then. As we record on Wednesday, the 5th of March, President Trump says he'll work tirelessly to end the war in Ukraine after receiving a positive letter from President Zelensky and, quote, strong signals from Russia that they're ready for peace. He was delivering his State of the Union, his primetime annual address to Congress, and he's gone some way, I think, to patching up relations with President Zelensky of Ukraine after that huge bust-up in the Oval Office, which was last Friday. Andy, I want to come to you first of all. There's lots to consider today, and we're going to do so with some real experts in just a mo. But I think one of the things I wanted to use to kind of frame this conversation on where Scotland sits in all of this is polling from Ipsos showing 71% of Scottish people have an unfavourable opinion of Donald Trump, 18% have a favourable view of him. The Scottish public actually hold more negative views of Trump than the British public do overall by 14 percentage points. Sir Keir Starmer convened a summit of European leaders last Sunday in London to discuss a way forward and a so-called coalition of the willing. What is Scotland's role in all of this, as far as you can see, Andy?
Well, I think Scotland has a much bigger role in this than we are probably thinking about. I understand why we're looking at it through the lens that we are. It's very much a global story, and on this side of the Atlantic, the story has been dominated quite rightly, in my view, I suppose, by Keir Starmer. But Scotland's place in this is pretty important. I think we can separate it into three, I think. So there's an economic issue. Two of Scotland's three biggest exports are salmon and whiskey. The USA is a big market for both of those exports. Tariffs will cause significant problems in those industries, and therefore there is a very significant economic reason for Scotland to be deeply interested and feel deeply involved in the Trump presidency. So that's the economic side of things. I think politically it's important. Not least because Trump is half Scottish. And, we kind of have a laugh about that sometimes, but this means something in this respect. It means something to him, not necessarily always a positive thing, but it means something to him. It means that whenever he's here, he's going to be in Scotland, and we have to work out how to deal with that. We've got an election coming up in a year. This is the sort of thing that can impact elections. You've already seen Keir Starmer's approval ratings going up a little bit. I mean, not a lot, but a reasonable amount. With Reform in a bit more trouble because of their closeness to Trump. If Starmer's approval ratings continue to go up, that will have a direct impact on Anas Sarwar's ratings here in Scotland, as we've talked about on this podcast before. There's inextricable links between the two, so it could be an election influencer. And then militarily, this is important as well. Now, what for reasons that will become abundantly obvious, Calum, when you introduce our guests, I'm not going to talk too much about the military side of things, lest I look like an idiot in 2 or 3 minutes' time. But I think that the SNP are... This is not just about Trident, but the conversation will inevitably come round to the Vanguard submarines and to the Trident warheads, and the fact that the SNP's position on Trident, on NATO, on defence in general, is inconsistent, a little bit shaky. And I'm not sure that at this time, with the threat that we have, that you want to have a shaky position on that with an election coming up. I mean, all we need to do is look at a map to understand the importance of Scotland in the North Atlantic region, and especially when the enemy is Russia, the importance of Scotland and the geographical place of Scotland just simply can't be ignored. And we need to ensure that we are secure here. And, if we think that those things don't have an impact on the political arguments that we have a lot on this podcast, then I think we're crazy.
Cool. I think that's helpful. Let's bring in then Defence Analyst Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford for some expertise. Stuart, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on.
It was a real pleasure, Stuart. Thank you for joining us. So let's pick up where Andy left off there and do a sort of big picture on how Scotland fits into this, because I think it's important for us to consider the realities of the situation that we face. And I suppose not to kind of whimper, not to say we don't have anything to do with this. What would be your take on that? Where is Scotland in this?
Yes, if I could just pick up a couple of things that Andy said. The first is that Donald Trump and his Scottish heritage. I have often said that, in fact, depending how you look at it, Donald Trump is Scotland's most successful politician by a country mile, certainly this century so far. And if you were a footballer, and a good one, we'd be more than delighted for him to pull on the blue jersey, I dare say. So he has deep Scottish roots, and I think we have to remember that. In terms of military importance, strategic geopolitical importance, Scotland does have a very important but underplayed so far role to play, partly because of its geographical location, controlling exits and entrances to the North Sea, the North Atlantic, the Irish Sea, and so on and so forth. And also because with the demise, or the imminent demise of Grangemouth, the two most important strategic sites in Scotland, in my opinion, are the naval base at Faslane Coulport and also RAF Lossiemouth, which is in many ways de facto a NATO base already. So we've got a big part to play in these of the general sort of defence and security scenario. And whilst the Scottish Parliament doesn't have any direct responsibility or competency in defence matters, which are all reserved to Westminster, as we know, Keir Starmer will be much happier to have an on-side Scottish Government and First Minister than someone who is proving to be difficult. And I think John Swinney's recent comments to Keir Starmer, which have been widely reported, are indicative that he is generally supportive.
And that support, I think, is notable, is crucial, because actually any coalition of the willing, as Sir Keir Starmer is describing it, that the UK would, I suppose, be a linchpin of and would kind of corral, by default will include Scottish people. And I think actually, with at the risk of making a very basic point, we must remember that as well, that there is a very active, direct Scottish role in any sort of peacekeeping force that will transpire.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. I know that John Swinney said that Scottish troops could deploy, excuse me, Scottish troops could deploy as part of any peacekeeping force. That's not really in his gift, but should the Ministry of Defence decide on instruction from Parliament, with Westminster Parliament, to deploy peacekeeping troops to Ukraine, say, there's absolutely no reason that they shouldn't nominate one of the battalions of the Royal Regiment of Scotland to do that. And of course, in the other two services, there's quite a considerable Scottish representation in both the Royal Navy and particularly in the Royal Air Force. So inevitably, Scottish individuals, Scottish people, would get involved in any sort of armed response to what's going on in Ukraine.
Yeah.